One day after my dad passed away, my mom gave me up for adoption without warning. Now, after 10 years of silence, she's reached out to me asking for help. I, 17, female, was recently contacted by my biological mother after 10 years of no contact. She put me up for adoption when I was 7 years old. Thankfully, I was able to find a family willing to take me in. For clarity, I'll refer to my biological mother as Rebecca and my adoptive parents as Mom and Dad. Rebecca had me with my biological father when she was around 20 years old. She had to drop out of college because of me, but my biological father completed his education. They got married right after he graduated. When I was around 3 years old, he was diagnosed with leukemia, and he passed away shortly after I turned 7. I guess the process for giving up my custody had already started long before my biological father passed away, because my mother gave me away and I moved in with my new family just one day after my dad passed. I remember it as clearly as if it happened yesterday, even though 10 years have passed. I was upset and confused about everything that was happening. I remember people telling me I'd be fine, that my father was in a better place, but all I wanted was to see how he was doing. He had been very sick, but he was always there whenever I wanted to see him. When he passed away, I wasn't even allowed to say goodbye. I barely had time to process what had happened before my new family showed up the day after my dad's death. My mom told me they were going to take care of me for a few days, but those days turned into weeks, then months, and eventually years. I kept waiting for my mother to reach out to me. I remember crying a lot because I felt abandoned. A few weeks after Mom and Dad took me and my biological grandparents came to visit. They've been in touch with me since then. At the time, I was too young to understand, but when I turned 14, they couldn't avoid my questions anymore. I needed to know what had happened to my birth mother. I knew I was adopted, but I didn't know why. Eventually, my grandparents and adoptive parents told me the truth. After my biological father's diagnosis, my mother was devastated. But instead of being there for him, she started an affair with my uncle. No one knew about the affair until 6 months before my father passed. As his health worsened, my uncle and Rebecca stopped hiding the affair, since they knew she would be with him once my father was gone. Rebecca and my uncle confessed to their parents, my grandparents, who were disgusted by the situation. However, they kept quiet for my father's sake, as he was already going through so much. Round the same time, Rebecca and my uncle announced that they didn't want to raise me and were planning to put me up for adoption. Despite the uproar, Rebecca was firm in her decision. She said she had been too young to have a child and never wanted to be a mother. She only had me and married my father because her parents pressured her into it. Now that my father was dying, she no longer wanted me either, since it would have been impossible to send me away while my father was alive. The day after he died, they allowed Mom and Dad to take me in. My adoptive parents were shocked by the situation, but they wanted to adopt a child to complete their family, as they had been struggling to conceive for a second time. They told me they didn't care about my age, even though most people prefer to adopt younger kids. One of Mom's cousins, who used to be friends with Rebecca, informed her about my situation. After hearing about me, my adoptive parents spoke to Rebecca directly by passing adoption agencies. Rebecca agreed to let them adopt me because she had been struggling to find anyone willing to adopt a 7-year-old. 4 months before my father passed, and 2 weeks before his death, even my adoptive parents believed I would stay with Rebecca for a few days after my father's passing. But she sent me away the very next day. After learning the truth, I was glad Rebecca had given me up for adoption. I was fortunate to find such a wonderful family. I love my mom, dad, and older brother, and I couldn't be happier. I also have 4 sets of grandparents, so you can imagine how spoiled I was growing up. No one kept in touch with Rebecca or my uncle after my father passed, and they didn't even attend his funeral. I was there, but I was going through such a confusing time that my grandparents thought it best for me to settle into my new life. Knowing why I was given up for adoption and why Rebecca didn't stay in my life, I found a family that truly wanted me. Now, at 17, I'm starting college soon, and I barely think about Rebecca or my uncle. However, a few days ago, Rebecca reached out to me on Instagram asking if I'd be willing to meet and mend things. I have a public account. Still, I couldn't understand why she wanted to reconnect after all these years. Before agreeing to meet her, I asked why she wanted to mend things now. She sent me a long message about how she regretted giving me up and prioritizing her life with my uncle over her responsibilities as a mother. She claimed she wasn't all wrong and had simply been too young to understand the consequences of her decisions. She said she didn't regret having me, regardless of what my family might have told me. After thinking about it, I agreed to meet her out of curiosity. I didn't tell my parents or grandparents. When we met for lunch 2 days ago, she seemed warm at first and explained how she had felt pressured into marrying my father and dropping out of college. She said she wasn't ready to be a mother but had to because of her parents. She felt suffocated in her marriage, and her husband's diagnosis pushed her to have an affair with my uncle, who she still believes is the love of her life. Then Rebecca broke down, revealing that her marriage was in trouble. That was the real reason she reached out. She wanted my help to reconcile with her and my uncle's parents. After she gave me up for adoption, both sets of grandparents cut her off, and she hasn't spoken to them in 10 years. Now her uncle was blaming her for their estrangement and wanted to reconcile. He believed that if she hadn't been so quick to give me up, their family wouldn't have fallen apart. Rebecca's plan was to have me convince my grandparents to forgive her and my uncle so that she could save her marriage. Hearing this, I realized she hadn't reached out to make amends with me, but to use me for her own selfish reasons. I regret agreeing to meet her. After she explained her situation, I told her that her tears weren't going to work on me. As I was about to leave, she said if I had been in her position, I'd understand. She insisted that she had tried her best to be a good mother despite not being ready. When she accused me of being brainwashed by my family, I lost my patience. She had only been a mother to me for 6 or 7 years, and even then she had all the help in the world. I'm not sure what to think now. But one thing is clear, she's not the mother I needed, and I won't let her manipulate me into fixing her life. Update: after that encounter with Rebecca, I walked away from the restaurant with a mix of emotions swirling inside me. I was angry, disappointed, and most of all hurt. I had prepared myself for some form of closure, or at least a sincere apology, but instead she had only proven that she hadn't changed. The 10 years of silence between us seemed meaningless because the moment she reappeared in my life, it was with selfish intentions. Over the next few days I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. Rebecca hadn't reached out to me because she regretted her decisions or because she wanted to rebuild a relationship with her daughter. No, she came back because her life was falling apart and I was just a tool for her to fix it. It was painful to realize that even after all this time, I was nothing more than a means to an end for her. As much as I tried to put it out of my mind, her words stuck with me. If you had been in my position, you'd understand. What did that even mean? Was she trying to justify abandoning her child? She had an affair, left me to fend for myself emotionally, and built a life with someone who wanted nothing to do with me. And now she had the audacity to expect me to clean up her mess. I decided not to tell my adoptive parents or grandparents about the meeting immediately. I needed time to process everything myself. However, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't carry this burden alone. My adoptive mom noticed that something was off with me. She always knew when something was bothering me, and eventually I broke down and told her everything. She listened patiently, her face a mixture of sadness and concern as I recounted my meeting with Rebecca. When I finished, she hugged me tightly, as if trying to shield me from the pain Rebecca had caused. My adoptive dad joined us, and together they reassured me that I was loved, that I didn't owe Rebecca anything, and that whatever decision I made, they would support me. Their words were comforting, but I still felt conflicted. I had always wondered what it would be like if Rebecca ever reached out to me, if we could have some sort of relationship, but now any hope of that had been shattered. It was clear that she hadn't reached out because she wanted me in her life. A few weeks passed, and during that time, Rebecca tried to contact me again. She sent me several long messages on Instagram, apologizing if she had upset me and asking me to reconsider helping her. She said things like, "Family is important, and I want to make things right with everyone," but all I could hear was manipulation. It was the same pattern she had always followed, using people to get what she wanted without any regard for their feelings. Eventually, I blocked her on Instagram. I didn't want to deal with her anymore, and I didn't owe her my time or my energy. But that didn't mean I was free from the emotional toll it taken on me. I spent a lot of time thinking about what family really meant. My adoptive parents had been there for me through everything. They had loved me unconditionally. That was family. Rebecca, on the other hand, had walked away from me when I was just a child, at the time I needed her the most. She had chosen a life without me, and now, after all these years, she wanted to pull me back, and not for my sake, but for her own. It hurt to realize that the woman who gave birth to me cared more about her own problems than about having a real relationship with her daughter. I decided to talk to my biological grandparents about what had happened. They had always been kind and loving towards me, and I felt like they deserved to know that Rebecca had reached out. When I told them, they weren't surprised. My grandmother shook her head sadly and said, "My grandfather was quieter, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes." They both told me that they supported whatever decision I made regarding Rebecca. "We've moved on from that part of our lives," my grandfather said. "You're the only family we care about." Their words made me feel safe and loved, but they also reinforced the reality that Rebecca wasn't going to get the reconciliation she was hoping for. Months went by, and I started to feel more at peace with my decision to cut Rebecca out of my life. I focused on preparing for college, spending time with my friends and family, and enjoying the normalcy of my everyday life. My adoptive parents, as always, were my biggest supporters, encouraging me as I navigated this next chapter of my life. But even though I had blocked Rebecca and moved on, there was a small part of me that still wondered if she would ever truly understand the pain she caused. I doubted it. People like her rarely do. They live in their own world, where their needs and desires come first, and everyone else is just a supporting character in their story. As I prepared to leave for college, I felt a sense of closure. I had learned something valuable from this experience. Not all biological ties define family, and sometimes the people who truly love and care for you aren't the ones connected to you by blood. My real family was the one that had been there for me through thick and thin, the one that had chosen me, loved me, and supported me without conditions. I wasn't going to waste any more time thinking about Rebecca. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. And I knew that, surrounded by the people who truly loved me, I was going to be just fine. Final update. After meeting with Rebecca, I took some time to process everything that happened. The emotions I felt were overwhelming: betrayal, disappointment, and even anger. I couldn't believe that after all these years her reasons for reconnecting with me were entirely self-serving. She didn't want to mend things because she missed me or regretted her decision. She wanted to use me as a tool to fix her broken marriage. It became clear that I was never her priority, even now. She had always chosen her own needs and desires over mine. Realizing this was painful, but it also gave me a sense of closure. I understood that I didn't need her validation or approval anymore. I had a real family mom, dad, my older brother, and my grandparents who truly loved and cared for me. They were the ones who had been there for me through everything, and they were the ones who deserved my loyalty. I decided not to tell my adoptive parents or grandparents about the meeting. I didn't want them to worry, and there was no point in bringing up old wounds. Rebecca's attempt to manipulate me failed, and I didn't see any need to let her disrupt the life I had built with the family that loved me. In the end, I blocked Rebecca on Instagram and any other platform. I'm moving forward with my life, focusing on college and the future ahead of me. I've learned that family isn't always about blood, it's about the people who are there for you, who choose to love you, and who never give up on you. Rebecca may have given me life, but my real family gave me everything else. I'm grateful for the life I have. This chapter of my life is closed, and I'm ready to embrace whatever comes next.